We've seen morph maps already in Lightwave and how they work on our object geometries. What we're going to see in this video is a quick way of automating morph maps when working with boned or skinned characters. So what I have here is our tube again with two bones in it, and of course it's got that little bulgy morph that comes out like this. Now, there are different ways in Lightwave to link the operation of morphs to different actions going on somewhere in the scene, and we'll touch on those at the appropriate point in the training, but this video is going to look at a particular displacement modifier, which is joint morph plus. You'll see that we have two here, joint morph and joint morph plus. They're very similar. Joint morph plus has some more options in it, and that's the one that we're going to look at, and why I'm going to ignore joint morph I'll explain in a short moment. So when you double click the joint morph plus interface to open it, this is what you get. And we see a whole bunch of options that we have here. First thing to take note of is control bone and axis here. Control bone basically means that this tool limits us to driving morphs based on the rotations of bones. That means this tool is no good for hooking up morphs to be driven by nulls or what have you. Also, of course, axis, heading, pitch and bank, means that the driver is only going to work for rotations. We can't base a morph to come off the position. What we can do, of course, is choose to use bones from some other object, if we were to have another object, in a way that's similar to the use bones from in the bones properties panel. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to choose the second bone, that's bone 2, to be my controlling item here, and I'm going to have it operating on pitch. This means that our morph is going to be driven by this action here. Let's ignore the angle min-max settings here for a second and just look down these different values. One of the things that joint morph plus allows us to do is to use staged values, and we'll see that in a quick second. First thing I'm going to do is just, however, tick value 1, which activates it, and we have an angle parameter. So I'm going to say that when I'm at 0 degrees, I want, well, in this case I want the base shape, and I can do that in a couple of ways. I can either leave it on base, or I can go to the morph and set that to 0%. Let's just leave it on base for a moment, shall we? We then need another value at which point the morph is blended in, so I'll turn on value 2, and I'm going to set this to, let's say, 100 degrees there. A positive value because I'm bending the bone here in the positive direction, let's say. My morph in this instance is the morph, which is the only one in the object, and I'll set that to say 100%. We now see that as my bone comes round here and reaches 100 degrees, the morph comes up to 100% blended in, and so the rotation of my bone is driving the morph. Notice at this point why it was important that I turned on value 1. If I turn it off, we see that nothing happens. The morph has to be blended between something and something else. This is telling it that 100 degrees the morph should be at 100%, but since it doesn't have anything to blend from, it's currently not working. So you always need to have a base case, as it were, something to blend from and to. Now, as I said, this can be staged. So let's say that at 80 degrees, I wanted my morph to only be blended in 30%, and then at 100 degrees, I again wanted the morph, but this time at 100%, and I'll turn that value on. What we see we can now get is a staged blend of the morph. So up until 80 degrees, the morph only comes in a little bit, and then as we approach 100, it starts to pump out the rest of the way. This is nice as it means you're not just stuck with a simple linear blend from 0% to 100% across the rotation range that you've set on the bone. You can sort of keyframe, for want of a better word, how the morph graduates in as the bone is animated on its axis. Of course, you have no way to manage these keys or their curves, so it's kind of linear. You can see that it suddenly starts to pop out there. It doesn't gradually smooth in or ease into the next stage of the animation, but there you go. And you can effectively set up to 5 keyframes, or 4 keyframes past the 0 point. Now we'll see that when I come beyond 100 degrees, boom, my morph suddenly vanishes there. It turns off. That brings us back to these settings up here. when the angle of the bone is less than the minimum angle given, in this case 0 degrees, we want the base shape or whatever minimum morph percentage has been set. Similarly, when the angle is greater than whatever the maximum angle set is, in this case 100 degrees, do we want the base shape or the max morph? If I turn on max morph, you'll see that we now maintain that morph past 100 degrees, just like this. And that really is all that there is to this tool. The interesting thing to note about it, and the reason that we use Joint Morph Plus rather than the older Joint Morph, is this. Joint Morph Plus will evaluate motion control on items. Regular Joint Morph will not. As such, if I take my bone here and I do a quick create handle for it, so here's my bone rotation being driven by a null under same as item there, we can see that the morph is still operating. This would be the same if the bones were controlled under IK or similar. So of course this method of linking morphs to bone rotations can see motion controllers. Many other methods cannot, including the older Joint Morph tool. Of course, once again, you'll see that we do have to be careful. You'll remember that I have set this morph to go up to the 100 degree mark. In this case, I'm just getting a world match between the bone and the null, and so when we come around beyond 90 degrees, of course our heading has flipped and our actual pitch rotation has retreated back to 76 degrees there. If this were a non-mode world rotation, then obviously we'd be getting the direct value copy over here. As such, you do need to keep an eye when you are using this tool that you are of course getting the correct rotations onto bones if they are being operated on motion control. So there we have it, the Joint Morph Plus tool. Nice, simple way to take a boned character and have morph maps or compensation morphs dial in automatically for us.